Hello and welcome to week 10. Midterm is out of the way. I'm going to go over it real quickly. Um, it would seem as though the midterm was relatively easy. Let me share my screen um, so we can get into this. I'll share this. Okay, so for 42%, the vast majority of you, this test was easy. The average score was a 90. There were 50 possible questions. 34 out of the 36 of you um, completed the test. 2 of you did not. Uh, and those 2 were not uh, part of the equation to come up with a 90 or better. So the average score was an A. I am going to go through. There was a few fill in the blanks, and I told you that you had to read my mind and put in the same exact thing that I put in. But I'm going to go through, and I've already checked a couple and given you some points, and I will adjust if your answer was close enough to correct. I'll give you some points on that. Nobody took advantage of the extra credit opportunity beyond the 2 that I already discussed. So those 2 students will get a full 10 points added to their uh, their midterm grade. I will go through these this week, and I will update your intermittent grades sometime this week. So let's press on over here. We can look at the bell curve for the test. Most of you completed the test by Friday, which is pretty cool. But if you notice the bell curve, it's pretty high. Of those that, there was, 2 students received a grade of a C. 17 of the 34 of you received a B, and 15 of you received an A or better. So I find this test seemed to be rather easy. But what I'm going to say is that you guys prepared well and that we have a pretty smart group of students in class this semester. But there's all of that in the study. The average time to complete again was 26 minutes. There were 2 that did not take the test of the 36 that are in the class. Those 2 will be receiving zeros, and those 2 are failing the class. I don't think anybody else is failing the class. There's a couple of you that are at risk, and I'll post the grades, updated grades, sometime this week. So this week is week 10. So we get into the meat and the bones of prison. We're going to start talking about prisons today this week. I'm going to put the video here. So you'll be able to find the video right here. Let's click on this. Okay, so you got my lecture notes. I'll put the video right here. The PowerPoint that I'm about to go through is here. And then the discussion. This week's discussion is almost a repeat of the extra credit discussion. Is what can you infer from the characteristics of those in prison today and the reasons for the incarceration of women, minorities, and people of color? And we will get into this discussion briefly or momentarily. The quiz is up. Let's close this. The quiz is 10 questions. And there it is. The first question is 2 prison systems that emerged in the United States at the turn of the century. What were later copied throughout the world? The Pennsylvania system and the Auburn system. And I've actually given you that correct answer So the first question is true. Okay, so let's get moving on. Now let me stop sharing this. Back over here. And I'm going to share my screen. And I can pop this up. All right, so corrections in the 21st century. This is chapter 7 of our textbook. And the question that it asks is, are prisons today a change station or a warehouse? So let's go through the learning objectives. We want to explain the differences between the Pennsylvania and Auburn prison systems. We want to outline the 10 eras of prison development. We want to describe the characteristics of persons in prisons today and discuss reasons for those incarcerations of women, minorities, people of color. We want to explain the need for educational, vocational programs in the prison system, the need for my programs, what evidence-based literature tells us about the impact of educational, vocational programs in prison, compare state, federal prison organizations and their administration, outline the emergence of solitary confinement in supermax prisons, and the impacts on staff and people incarcerated. Discuss the impact of technology on corrections. So, the history of prisons in America, the penitentiary system. This is the earliest form of large-scale incarceration. It punished individuals by isolating them so they could reflect on their misdeeds, repent, and reform. The penitentiary system was brought to us by the Quakers, and the idea that if you were not suitable to be in society, we were going to send you to the penitentiary, a place where you can find penance, where you can repent, where you can think about what you have done to society, and you could, in fact, repent and turn from your sins before we return you to society. Matthew chapter 15, starting at verse 18, tells us, I think it's actually verse 20, 21, 19, 20, 21. The scripture tells us that, well, here, let me just go look it up. I don't want to misquote the Bible. So give me a second. But if you read chapter 15 of Matthew, it talks about these things. And I'm going to be reading from the, well, I'll go find the King James. I'm going to be reading from the King James version of the Bible. Matthew chapter 15. Well, I was wrong. It's Matthew 18. Maybe. Okay, so Matthew chapter 15 talks about, starting at verse 15, Matthew 18 at verse 15 talks about how we address people who sin within the community. And verse 17, it says, and if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. I know a lot of people change that to Republican, but a publican is, a tax collector, somebody who is gone and done. So the penitentiary system was an attempt. If a person refuses to repent and refuses to turn away from his wicked deeds, he was to be shunned. And the way that the Quakers put this together is that they shunned you into a prison system. And this first prison, the Pennsylvania system, was at the Walnut Street Jail. And the Walnut Street Jail involved a solitary confinement in silence. instead of corporal punishment. Prior to the Quakers starting the prison system, we had corporal punishment. We put you in locks and blocks and in the pillory. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of those where somebody's head is in this piece of wood in his arms, and there's this little stake that he can kind of rest his backside on. If you do it wrong, that you'll impale yourself. Okay. And this was solitary confinement. You were not allowed to talk. You were not allowed to see. The only thing that you were allowed to have in your cell was a Bible, so that you could read your Bible and yet you could be reformed. And when you were released from prison, you would be a God-fearing individual. If you left your cell, you were put in a bag, or a sack was put over your head, so that you couldn't see who else was in prison with you. Because as being a prisoner, you were set apart. You were shunned, and nobody was to know who you were. You were nothing but a number. You were nothing but a cell number. Okay. And then this moved to the Auburn system. Okay. And this allowed inmates to work together during the day. They were isolated in single cell solitary confinement at night. But they were allowed to work together during the day. They were able to and allowed to produce manufactured goods to help allay the costs of keeping them in prison. But if you were caught talking or communicating, you were severely punished. So the eras of our prison system in the United States was first the penitentiary era from 1790 through 1825. Texas didn't have a prison yet. Texas didn't even exist yet. Texas wasn't even part of Mexico yet. Texas did not become part of Mexico until 1826. And in our country, in our rehabilitation era, it was a rehabilitation and deterrence. We separated people, we put them in solitary confinement, and they were silent. And then we moved to, they were able to congregate, but they were silent. Because we have found, and research has shown, that 30 days of solitary confinement without being able to talk, without being able to see other people, would cause insanity. You know, there would be a mental break, and these people would go absolutely insane. Okay, so in 1825 through 1826, we had the mass prison era. And this is when, 1857 or 1847 is when the Walls Unit was starting to be built in Texas. In 1857, it was officially opened. The idea was incapacitation and deterrence. We started the host squads. You were congregated labor. You were living in spaces without silence. And your labor was contracted out. It was slave labor. Okay? Slavery ended in the United States in 1865. But through 1876, we had contract prison labor. And that contract prison labor went on through the 1900s. If you read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, it's about mass incarceration and how we took slavery out of the plantations and put slavery into the prisons, where people would still be sent out to do contract labor for the different businesses. And then we had the prison I work at. If you go above the gym, there's the craft shop. The craft shop has been shut down, but inmates were able and were allowed to make things and then sell them in the common market. Texas still has 2 craft shops in the state of Texas, but the things that these guys make in these craft shops can only be sold to state employees. So now, but you do have a lot of people who have artwork and they make things in prison and they mail them home, and then their family members sell those things. But there is no large scale contract labor where the prison is paid for the work that their inmates do. Then we moved in 1876 to 1890. We moved to the reformatory era, where we focused on rehabilitation. We had indeterminate sentencing. Okay? We established the parole system. Okay? But we sentence you from 2 to 20 years. We still have those in a lot of states where you're sentenced to 2 to 20 years. And it's indeterminate sentencing. Where as soon as you meet the markers for parole, you're released. And the parole boards were established. Okay? The industrial era from 1890 to 1935, we just had incapacitation. We moved to this idea that punishment didn't work. And there's no sense in trying to rehabilitate the offender. We're just sending them to prison. And we're going to leave them in prison. Again, we still saw the contract labor. We saw state use labor. We saw the convict lease program, public works labor. And Texas still has a public works labor. They're all S1s. They are on the verge of getting parole and going home anyway. But they are brought out into the community to do public works. We had a major water failure in the city a couple months ago. And what happened is that we found that the inmates from my prison were out in the street digging holes and digging the trenches and laying new pipe for the city water system. And this still goes on to some point today. But the idea was that nothing works and rehabilitation doesn't work, and the inmates are not going to rehabilitate because you send them to prison. Okay. So you just get sent to prison, and then the parole board will let you go once they think that you have served enough time and you've completed enough programs and you've done the things that you need to do to prove your worthiness to be back in society. Then from 1935 to 1945, we go into the punitive era, where the courts have come out and stopped the contract labor. They've stopped the convict lease programs, and it's just strict punishment and custody. And we're sending you to prison. We're throwing away the key. Come back in 15 years, we'll let you go free. The treatment era. In 1945 to 1967, we returned to a rehabilitation model. This era, right after World War II, although the progressive movement started with President Woodrow Wilson, we saw the progressive era moving into the prison system with the idea that everybody is suffering from some form of mental or medical problem, and we needed to treat the symptoms. Okay. We needed to see we needed to see the or treat the symptoms of problems, because we've got sex offenders. So if the sex offenders were treated by a psychiatrist on the proper ways to fulfill your sexual desires, or the proper way to meet the needs of your family, with job training and resume training and etiquette training and all of these treatment programs, that we would have a better society and a better community, and that we would be able to just find a world that produces a better member of society. But with these increased freedoms and these increased education opportunities and things, we started seeing the emerging of unrest in prisons. This is where we started seeing a whole lot of prison riots. You could go to YouTube and view prison riots of the 1960s. The Carrasco event in at the walls unit. You know, there's still bullet holes on the walls of the prison from this Carrasco event that took a while to get through, and all of the facts of this event just slipped my mind at the moment. So in 1967 and 1980, the community-based era began, and this was intermediate sanctions. Again, we wanted to look at treating individuals and treating offenders and helping these offenders become better members of society. So we started intermediate sanctions. We also started seeing an overcrowding in the prison system. Excuse me. So we had intermediate sanctions to where we would send you to a work camp. We would send you to a restitution center. We'd send you to a treatment facility, a safe P, places for you to go, and that we could punish you, treat you, and still keep you in society. It was an expansion of the probation program. Okay, 1980 and 1995, we started moving to a nothing works theory. And, you know, we've had 35 years, 35 years of treatment programs. And we saw that crime still continued. What do you want, dog? 1 minute. Sorry about that. The dog became a nuisance. But he wasn't barking, so maybe he'll start barking out on the chain. Guys, so this was just a warehousing area. We'd send you to prison. We didn't worry so much about a lot of treatment programs. We didn't, because we believed, there was the belief that nothing worked. We just needed to incapacitate them, keep them in prison for their period of time. And we started seeing that this indeterminate sentencing also stopped. We started seeing a increase in mandatory sentencing. Okay, so this caused serious overcrowding, and we saw more prison riots through the 80s and the 90s. So these prison riots got severe. Officers were killed. There's a guy that works at my prison. He was involved in a riot, and he lost his eye. He got stabbed in the eyeball, and he lost his eye. Prison's a dangerous place, and this incapacitation made the inmate population feel like they were nothing more than animals. And if they're nothing more than animals, they're going to act like animals, and they're going to strike out, and they're going to attack their handlers. The 1985 to present, and I'm going to put a limit on that. And I'm going to say that not to present, but 1985 to COVID. We had the retribution era. It was the just desserts era, and the goal was retribution. We started seeing more violent crime. We started seeing more sex offenses. We started seeing a lot more pedophilia and a lot of disturbing crimes. And we moved to this idea that people deserve the sentences and the punishments that they receive. Again, went to mandatory sentencing. 1990s, there was this move, and President Clinton signed the Truth in Sentencing Act, in that the Truth in Sentencing Act said that if you were sentenced to prison, you had to serve at least 60% of your time before you were allowed out of prison. I know the 3 strikes laws came about. Texas has a habitual criminal. They could tag you as a habitual criminal. But one of the stories that was in this textbook, in an earlier edition of this textbook on the 3 strikes laws, we found that we heard a man, he went to prison for burglary, and he was sentenced to 10 years. He was 17 years old, sent to prison for 10 years. He got out in 6. He was put out on parole in 6. So at 23 years old, he's back on the street. At 24 years old, he's back on the street, and he gets busted for home invasion and aggravated sexual assault. And he's sentenced to 20 years in prison. And he gets out in 15. So now he's now pushing 40 years old. He can't get a job because of his crime record and his criminal record. He's just not doing well at all. And he goes to Walmart and he steals some DVDs with the intent of bringing them to the pawn shop, selling them to the pawn shop so he can have some money so he could buy some food. And this was his 3rd crime. And so they labeled him as a habitual criminal. And now he's serving life in prison without the possibility of parole for shoplifting and stealing $50 worth of DVDs from Walmart. Because of these 3 strikes laws and this habitual criminals and the Truth in Sentencing, where people were not allowed to get out of prison early, we started seeing serious overcrowding again. And then you have the Ruiz case, Ruiz versus Estelle, and a lot of cases that talk about the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment, and dealing with the overcrowding. So Texas and a lot of states had to start building a lot more prisons to house all of these inmates. Okay, so the statistics among the states and the federal government, the number of people that are in prison. The federal government has 152,000 people in prison. Texas has the most people in prison, which is 135. And I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago. If you remember, I went down to a conference that I had, and I heard that by 2030, they're expecting that number to be close to 170,000 people in prison in the state of Texas. California has 100,000 people. Florida has 81,000 people. Georgia has 47,000 people. The 5 lowest states is Vermont. Vermont has the fewest people in prison with 1,284. North Dakota, Maine, Wyoming, Rhode Island with 2,227. But I heard one of you ask, so how many people are in Arkansas prisons? I should turn this into an extra credit opportunity, but I'm not going to. Currently, as of 2022, there were 17,000 people incarcerated in the state of Arkansas. That includes those people who are in prison and in the local county jails. The Texas Department of Corrections, Arkansas Department of Corrections, reporting housing about 16,500 inmates in state prisons. So the remainder of the people are in county jails, or they're awaiting transfer to the prison system. Okay, so incarceration rates per population, the five highest, you see Arkansas makes that list, and this is per 100,000 population. Arkansas has a rate of 693 per 100,000 people are in prison. And Mississippi is the highest. And notice that all of those are southern states. Mississippi, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas. The five lowest states per capita incarceration, the federal government is 55, but you're going to expect that, seeing there's 360 million people in the United States. If you're doing a population per capita population of 100,000, you're going to find a lot fewer people. Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island, and Vermont, these are all New England states. Massachusetts being the fewest per capita in prison, and then everything is in between. Number of incarcerated women in jurisdiction. Okay, so and then again their rate per 100,000. Texas is the highest with 10,000 women incarcerated. Arizona, the lowest. Again, Texas, the federal government, Arizona, Ohio. The lowest states are Vermont, Rhode Island, Maine, North Dakota, and Massachusetts. Again, Vermont being the lowest number of people. They only have 84 women in prison in Vermont. Wow. Okay, so persons under the jurisdiction of state and federal prisons, 87% are in state prisons, 13% are in federal prison. We got 1 million people in state prison, and again, 152 in federal prison, 152,000. So who's in prison by gender? It is mostly male. Race and ethnicity, it is mostly African American, followed by white, Hispanic. Their ages, 47% are between the ages of 35 and 54. The next largest age group are 18 to 34. So it's 35 to 54, followed by 18 to 34. So 18 to 54 makes up the vast majority of the people in prison. Persons in federal prison, 47% are in for drug offenses, public order offenses, violent offenses, but mostly they're in there for drug offenses. Where in the state prisons, 62% are violent offenders, as opposed to property offenses, drug offenses, and public order crimes. The average sentence length versus the actual time served. So the actual sentence on the average is between 10 and 12 years. For violent offenders who are actually serving 6 or just under 6. Property crimes is about 5 years, serving 2. Drug offenses is about 5 years, serving 2. Public order crimes like DWI and things, on the average across the country, is just over 4, serving 2. Other crimes, less than 10. So as you can see here, the average sentence length for persons under state and federal prison terms is less than 12 years. You're going to get a few with longer, and especially murder. So race and ethnicities in prisons based on years, we can see that since 2010, the trend is going down for just about everybody. Rates per 100,000 people incarcerated. The whites, Asians, Native Americans, whites and others Okay, has maintained about the same throughout the years, but the African American population, the Native American population is going down significantly. The Hispanic population is on a downward trend, but the whites and others have maintained steady, which is increasing our percentage of whites and others in the prison system. Okay, so the ages of person in prisons, the middle-aged and older inmates make up a growing portion, and this has a lot to do with the Truth in Sentencing Act. It has a lot to do with the habitual criminal classes. Now, we've seen a sustained drop in juvenile incarcerations in adult prisons. We're seeing fewer and fewer people at the age of 17, 18, 19, 20 going to prison. They're not going to prison until they're a little older. Most serious offenses in prisons over the last decade. The most serious convicted of violent offenses have increased to 62%, while those convicted of other crimes have decreased by 5%. Public order offenses have seen an increase from 9 to 11%. In federal prisons, 90% of the individuals are charged with drug and public order offenses, including immigration, regulatory violations, tax crime, environmental matters. Fewer incarcerated for violent property crimes because violent crimes are handled primarily by the state prison system. You have to cross state lines before a violent crime is taken federal. Other drivers for mass incarceration is the role of jail populations in driving mass incarceration is significant. Pretrial detention, sentence jail populations, the things that are happening at the county jail is what is driving mass incarceration. So, education programming in the prison system. The advantages of this is it lowers the rates of recidivism. It increases the chances of finding employment because if you've got an education, you're more likely to find a job. It improves social climate around the individual and reduces problems with disciplinary infractions. Okay, so Robert there is a theory. It's called strain theory. And I've talked to a few of you about strain theory. The idea is that if you cannot make a living on your own accord, Robert Merton, I can never remember his last name. Robert Merton said he's brought us, or he's credited with strain theory. And he says that if people are unable to obtain a job and unable to provide for their families, they're more likely to commit criminal activities. If they are unwilling or unable to obtain the basic needs of life, housing, shelter, companionship, sex, they are going to turn to illegitimate means to gain those things. They're going to move to a avenue. Okay, so education is a way to help you obtain these things. If you have an education, you can get a better job. Somebody with a high school education is going to receive, they're going to be paid almost $1 million more over their lifetime than the people that do not have a high school education. Those with a bachelor's degree will receive, $1 million more than those with a high school education. Okay, and this is where I get absolutely baffled. Those with graduate work and PhDs are supposed to be making close to $2 million more a year. I mean, not a year, over their lifetime, than those with just the bachelor's degree. I am a chaplain for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I make less, even with all of my education, all of my credentials, I make less than an entry-level CO. Why I do my job is, well, it's because I'm working for somebody more than the state of Texas. Okay, so it is proven that education does improve lifestyle, and it improves your ability to live, to grow, to get a job, to get a girlfriend, to get a boyfriend, to get a house, to be able to pay rent, and avoid moving into these criminal activities, such as Robert Merton has suggested. Some of the challenges faced by correctional educators is delivering effective instruction. There are very few of us who have PhDs who work in the rehabilitation programming. There are very few of us that have graduate work that work in the rehabilitation services. The people who work for the Wyndham School District uh, are certified teachers for the state of Texas, but we've got 3 openings. We can't keep teachers, and we can't keep chaplains, and we can't keep quality staff working in the rehabilitative services. And a lot of that is because there's a low priority in correctional budgeting. Most of the budgeting for corrections goes to security staff. They go to securing the prison and maintaining the housing. Not a whole lot goes into the budget for the chaplaincy. Okay? Most of the things that I do, most of the things that I get done, most of the things that I bring into the prison are paid for by volunteers. So next week, on the next month, I have what's called a Day with Dads. And the Day with Dads is I'm bringing kids to the prison. Mama's going to leave their kids at the prison, and I got to start doing the welcoming and all of that next week. I got to start calling these families to set this up. But we, and the toys and the gifts and the things that these inmates are going to be given to their families, the things that are going to be done are necessary, or they're in place to establish and set up. They're going to be paid for by volunteers. The prison's not paying for any of it. The holiday season is coming. The Angel Tree sends presents to almost every inmate in the United States. Not to the inmate, but to their children, to their families. And all of this is paid for by volunteers. You're going to see, you're somewhere on your campus, probably in the student union, you're going to see an angel tree. You're going to see a tree sitting there. And on this tree, there is going to be a little tag. And this tag is saying, please buy this gift for this child. Well, that gift is going to go to the child of an inmate. And it's all paid for by volunteers. Now, the system doesn't pay for that. The system is more concerned. 12 years ago, the chaplains in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice were paid just the same amount of money as a major in the Texas Department of Corrections. Today, the chaplain gets paid less than an entry-level CO. So that shows you where their priorities are. Their priorities aren't in rehabilitation. Their priorities for the prison system is in corrections and in incapacitation and in housing and in security. So these are some of the challenges that we see. Okay, vocational training. I've got a wood shop, a carpentry shop on my unit where these guys are taught how to be cabinet makers. I've got a culinary arts. These people leave here with advanced certificates in culinary arts. They are chefs, and some of the food that they make is absolutely amazing. So these practical skills, these attitudes, this understanding, these knowledges are necessary for an effective employment in specific occupations. And these occupations are willing to hire people that have to check the box. The advantage is it reduces problems that people face after release. It helps them get a job. It helps them maintain that necessity for the hierarchy of needs. And then the strain theory doesn't pop in. Program completion, certifications, signals to potential employers that the individual's seriousness in moving forward from their criminal activity and becoming productive members of society. You know, it is essential, it is necessary, it is important that we have these programs. Okay, it also shows the prison system. It helps the offender, because if the offender starts getting in trouble, he's going to get kicked out of this program. Okay, I've got a guy in my program. I have a faith-based program. I have a guy in my program. I found out that he was stealing peanut butter from food services and then selling it to the other inmates in the program. I kicked him out of the program. He's not there. He's done. He's toast. Okay, because you know, if you want these incentive programs, it helps incentivize the. It's not even incentive programs, but these programs help encourage offenders to stay out of trouble and stop violating the rules. Okay, so the Texas program, and they've also got programs like CDLs. We have our truck driving program. Okay, so if you ever find yourself in Texas, you're going to see these white cab overs, yeah, dragging 18-wheelers, driving from prison to prison to prison. The people driving these are inmates. They're offenders. They're driving supplies from one prison to the next prison to the next prison. They find themselves on the interstate every single day. At 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they stop at the closest prison. They park their truck. They go into the prison. They get set up in a cell for the night. In the morning, they wake up, they take a shower, they have breakfast, and they're back on the road delivering from one prison to the next to the next. There's the SWIFT programs and the TLM programs. There's coding programs. There's all kinds of things that help. Yeah. In federal and state prisons, people who are incarcerated are required to work if they're medically able. This is the opportunity to increase an individual's pre-release employment opportunities. Okay, so you were a janitor, you were a clerk, you did all of these things. Okay, so I don't have one, but every other chaplain in the state of Texas has a clerk. You know, he helps with filing. You know, he does all of this clerk work. Okay, so when you leave, you can say, look, I've been a clerk for the prison system, for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I was an inmate clerk, and I have gained these skills, time management, all of these things. Okay, and this helps them. You know, they can pad their resume with it and their applications. You know, that they worked while they were in prison. Okay? And if you want to keep the job, you have to stay out of trouble. You get in trouble, you get fired. You get fired, you go back to having no job. And then when you get out of prison, you're done. You're toast. Prison industries. Okay? We have a garment factory on our prison. It's where incarcerated workers work in a realistic work environment. Okay? They have to be at work at a certain time. They don't get off at a certain time. They're allowed a break. They're allowed lunch. It's the garment factory. What they're doing is they're making, the guys on my prison make the uniforms for inmates across the country, across the state, because the state of Texas wears white. You know, specifically, my prison makes pants. So we make pants from small, extra small, to 10 extra large. And that's all they do all day long is they sew and they make pants. The prison down the street, down in Abilene, they make shirts. Okay? There's another prison that makes boxers and T-shirts. You know, there's another prison that makes officer uniforms. I don't wear an officer uniform. I wear real world clothes to work. I don't wear a cowboy hat, but I wear a fedora. And when I'm at work, I wear a fedora from in the winter months from late September, October into April. I wear felt. From April to late September, October, I wear straw. But I wear a hat every day. But these prison industries provide job skills. They pay a local wage for similar work. At the federal level, they pay a wage. You know, when I was working for the federal prison system, the inmates that worked for me, they received, I think it was $3 an hour. Today, they're making minimum wage. They make $7 an hour. Here in Texas, you don't get paid a wage. You get paid time. Okay? So if you're a clerk and you're working for me as a clerk, you get time and a half. If If you're working in the garment factory, you get double time. If you are one of the S1s and you're one of the trusted inmates who are working outside the fence, outside the walls, you could be making triple time for the work that you do. The host squads make double time, and this way you don't have to spend as much. You can work your way out of prison. Okay? It enables persons to acquire marketable skills, to increase their potential for success and for rehabilitation. It's meaningful employment upon release. Okay? So if you've been a seamstress working in the garment factory, you can go to Levi and you can go get a job making jeans for Levi's. Okay? You can go, if you're a clerk, you can go, especially if you're a church clerk, you're a chaplain clerk, you could go to a church and you can become one of their administrative assistants. And you can do things such as that. And it enables you, a person in prison, to become a tax-paying citizen if you're paid a wage. Texas inmates aren't paid a wage. Okay, so Federal Prison Industries is paid prison work program. Unicor is a trade name for the present Federal Prison Industries. You get enhanced certificate programs. It allows interstate and foreign sale of goods and products by incarcerated personnel. You can go to Unicor and you can buy some of their products online. It requires that state correctional agencies meet certain criteria. Okay, state prison organizations, there's a central authority based in the state capitals. There's legal control, and there's equitable distribution of the resources. The state departments of corrections vary in size. It is the fourth largest category of state spending. The vast majority of funds go to state corrections. 9 out of every $10 goes to corrections in just about every state. And every state's not spending enough money on their corrections because all they're focusing on is housing and feeding and securing inmates. They're not looking at all the other programs that need funding. The garment section. Okay, so our garment factory makes over $2 million a year selling pants to the state of Texas. And then they use that $2 million to improve their facilities and to buy materials and goods so that they can make more pants. Okay, so the Federal Bureau of Prisons is a separate correctional agency apart from the state departments. The federal prisons have their own prisons. They have their own officers. They're managed and overseen by the Bureau of Prisons. The 3 Prison Acts of 1891 authorized the establishment of 3 penitentiaries: Atlanta, Leavenworth, and McNeil Island. Okay, so there is a prison on the East Coast, in Middle America, and on the West Coast. The director faces challenges relating to the BOP's failure to implement the RNA system that's mandated by the First Step Act, recommended by the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, in improving data collection, collecting timely assessments, and setting goals for evidence-based programs. And I have problems with getting my reports done on time because I'm doing so many programs. I'm overseeing so many programs. At the end of the month, I got reports due. I don't always get them done on time, but I get them done, and then they send me an email and say, "You're late. You didn't do this one right." At the state level of Federal Bureau of Prisons, there's a decrease in the number of prisons under the federal authority. President Reagan tried to privatize the federal prison system. And this is where we got GEO and CoreCivic and Corrections Corporation of America and MTC. And the Management Training Corporation was the official company that started Job Corps. Back during the Depression, Job Corps was a non-government agency organization that was created through MTC, the Management Training Corporation. Well, Management Training Corporation branched out into federal corrections, even state corrections. There were several up until this year. There were 13 units inside the state of Texas that was run by MTC or by CoreCivic or by Geo or by some other private agency, Fingerhut. It's not Fingerhut. Fingerhut's the parent company, but Wackenhut is the corrections agency. And this helped. The average cost to confine one person in federal prison is $39,000 a year, and that includes the officers to watch him. So privately organized operated prisons, which I already ventured into, began in 1984, like I said, with President Reagan. 40% of the private prison population is in 5 states: Florida, Texas, Arizona, Tennessee, and Ohio. The issue that stands at the debate is, and I almost turned this into our discussion question this week. Again, start thinking about it. I might turn it into an extra credit discussion later in the semester, maybe for the final. But the big debate is, should people get wealthy and make money off of the confinement of inmates? Okay. Should the administration of punishment be an inherent responsibility of the government and not the private sector? Okay. So that would be a good question. Okay, so minimum security prisons, it confines the least dangerous persons for both short and term periods, long-term periods. The freedom of movement, privileges, and amenities are determined based on the goals of the facility. They may have dormitory housing. They have staff to inmate ratio, which is relatively low. Now, I have 1,150 inmates on my unit, and at any given time, I only have 10 officers. That's not counting the H card, the day shift, Monday through Friday officers, or myself. Just security staff. It's an open institution. It's minimum security. Minimum security doesn't always have fences. They're also known as work camps. My prison is a medium security prison, which contains individuals who are less dangerous than those in maximum security. There are fewer controls. Doors have to remain locked. We use cell blocks, 2-man cells. There are, in my prison, there's 2 tiers, 22 cells per tier, and 2 men per tier. 84, normally about 84 inmates per cell block. There's a fortified perimeter. There are gun towers. The staff to inmate ratio is lower than you find at the maximum security. And the level of amenities and privileges are slightly higher than you find at the maximum security. Maximum security prison confines dangerous individuals for long periods of time. They have a secure perimeter. They have barred cells. They have a high staff to inmate ratio. Imposes strict controls on the movement of incarcerated persons. It offers few programs, few amenities, and very few privileges. Supermax, the BOP, is reverted to the concentration model. All problem prisoners will be housed together in a separate facility called Supermax. A lot of them are held in solitary confinement. And these current terms for prison gangs, they hold prison gang members, the shot callers, and the people that are a significant security threat to other prisons are held in Supermax. Supermax housing is a freestanding facility or a distinct unit within a facility. Like at the Robertson unit, they call it 12 building. 12 building is maximum security. You've got several officers that are working there. They're all wearing thrust vests. They're all carrying heavy amounts of gas. There's a lot of, nobody leaves without being shackled and handcuffed, with 2 officers escorting them everywhere they go. it can be quite difficult. So solitary confinement is even a higher level of security. When everything else fails, solitary confinement is the last resort to correct negative behavior. It ignores what other jurisdictions are doing to scale back. There's surveillance 24 hours a day. Some of the disadvantages, the 24 hours a day, there's no privacy, there's no security. You've got to, in my unit, you've got a building sergeant. You've got a, for the cell, the medium and maximum segregation, solitary confinement. You've got a lot of officers watching over things. It takes up a lot of staff time. Techno corrections. Contraband is any item that represents a serious threat to the safety, security of the correctional institution, staff, incarcerated population, general public. The major forms of prison contraband are cell phones and drugs. There was a chaplain down in South Texas that was busted. He was bringing thumb drives, like this one, into the prison system, and he was selling access to pornography on those jump drives. You can find everybody gets wrapped up in this contraband issue. A lot of it is cell phones. A lot of states, the federal government and the state of Texas have moved to tablets where inmates are issued tablets. And these tablets allow them to email. They allow them to make phone calls. They allow them to do a lot of things. There's a YouTube version of YouTube called Pando that inmates have access to so that they can watch these things. And then they get hacked. They get altered, they get changed, and it becomes contraband. Video conferencing is used for visitation, for legal hearings. Zoom has become a big advent inside the prison system. It increases the number of visitations that can be conducted each day. COVID-19 encouraged its use, and COVID, because we were not allowed to have contact visits, we moved to video and these tablets to allow people to have contact with their family members. Kind of sad. It was, inmates were getting greater access to family members than people in hospitals and old folks' homes who are dying of COVID, not being able to have contact with their loved ones. It improves security by reducing movement and the flow of contraband. It gives us the ability to use AI to review mail instead of having an officer have to read every single email that comes through. We can use AI to tag and to identify suspicious emails, and then those emails can be read by the officers in the mailroom. The new cost to acquire video conferencing hardware and software is a disadvantage. AI, I've already mentioned AI. The general ability for computers to mimic human intelligence to enable problem solving. AI technologies are working to assist or augment the correctional staff in their ability for data-driven decisions. Prisons, because of the advent of computers and technology and AI and the ability to compute data a lot quicker, allows us to have data-driven and scientific, research-driven decisions and activities and approaches to helping society and helping address issues within the prison system itself. So that is where we're at today. We are talking about prisons. Let me stop sharing. I'm going to need to, the sun's a little bright today. No, I don't want that. Don't want that. Oh, there it is. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So now you should just see me leaning up, trying to look past the sun. All right, here we go. You can actually see how bright the sun is. How dark my glasses have gotten. So that's corrections this week, and I've gone a while. Over an hour and 11 minutes. I don't know how long I've recorded itself, but I've been online for almost an hour. I could talk about prison all day long. I could talk about the things that go on in prisons all day long. I hope I've kept your attention to the end, and I hope that you have a great week. I hope that you have a great week, and I will see you in the forums.